I first took the job as a caretaker at Battery Point Lighthouse, I was drawn by its unique charm and historical significance. Built in 1856 and accessible only during low tide, it stood as a sentinel over Crescent City, California. The lighthouse, decommissioned by the U.S. Coast Guard in 1965, had long since built up a reputation among locals as a hotspot for paranormal activity. I considered myself a rational person, not easily swayed by ghost stories. That was until I spent my first night at Battery Point. I arrived just before low tide, eager to explore the lighthouse before the waters rose and isolated me from the mainland. The structure was a marvel of old-world craftsmanship, its white walls weathered by decades of relentless ocean winds. The tide was beginning to come in as I stepped inside, the sound of waves crashing against the rocky shore, providing an eerie soundtrack to my solitary vigil. As night fell, I settled into the caretaker's quarters, a modest room furnished with period pieces. The wooden rocking chair in the corner creaked gently, as if moved by an unseen hand. I dismissed it as the old house settling, but a chill ran down my spine nonetheless. I decided to make a cup of tea and sat at the small kitchen table, looking out over the darkening sea. Suddenly, I felt a light touch on my shoulder, as if someone were trying to get my attention. I turned quickly, but no one was there. My heart pounded as I tried to rationalize the sensation, but it was difficult to ignore the feeling that I was not alone. Later that night, as I lay in bed, the creaking of the rocking chair grew louder. I stared into the darkness, my eyes straining to see any movement. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard heavy footsteps ascending the stairs. They were deliberate and measured, like the stride of a man used to patrolling the lighthouse. I sat up, my breath catching in my throat. The steps stopped outside my door, and I braced myself for the creak of the door opening, but nothing happened. I forced myself to lie back down, telling myself it was just my imagination. But then, the soft shuffling of slippers across the floor caught my attention. I looked over to where I had left my slippers, neatly placed by the bed. They were gone. I got up and found them at the foot of the rocking chair, as if someone had moved them while I slept. The next morning, I woke to find my belongings rearranged. A book I had left on the bedside table was now on the kitchen counter, and a cold draft seemed to flow through the room, despite all the windows being closed. Determined to get to the bottom of the disturbances, I spent the day researching the lighthouse's history and speaking with locals. They told me about the 3 distinct spirits said to haunt Battery Point, a child and 2 adults, one of whom was likely the old lighthouse keeper. One local, an elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson, shared her own experiences. "The child is playful," she said. "You'll feel a tug on your shirt or hear a giggle, but it's the adults you have to watch out for. They're the ones who move things around and walk the halls at night. I've even heard the sea boots stomping up and down the stairway." That night, I decided to confront whatever was haunting the lighthouse. I stayed up late, the lantern casting long shadows on the walls. Around midnight, the rocking chair began to move again, more vigorously this time. I approached it, my hands trembling. "Who are you?" I whispered into the darkness. For a moment, everything was still. Then, a faint whisper filled the room, barely audible above the sound of the wind. "Keeper," it said. The temperature dropped suddenly, and I saw a faint figure materialize by the window. It was an older man, dressed in the uniform of a lighthouse keeper, his face lined with years of hard work and exposure to the elements. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "I must keep the light," he said, his voice echoing with an otherworldly resonance. "The ships, they depend on me." As quickly as he had appeared, he vanished, leaving me standing in stunned silence. The rocking chair stopped moving, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. In the days that followed, the disturbances became less frequent, as if the spirits had accepted my presence. I continued my duties, always mindful of the otherworldly residents I shared the lighthouse with. Battery Point Lighthouse remains a place of mystery and haunting beauty, a testament to the souls who once tended its light and still linger in its shadow.